Time for our weekending strategy session with political commentator Jerry Nichols, coming to us from downtown Toronto. And here in studio with me, the NDP strategist Emily Tamman and Seamus Murphy of Council Public Affairs. Okay, so we had some news break right before we went to air, as is wont to do on a Friday. And that is that the federal ethics commissioner is looking into a complaint that the Conservatives put forward regarding a clam contract. Chowder, all kinds of great things that come from clams, that went to a relative of Dominic LeBlanc, the fisheries minister, a cousin, also a firm that has a lot of Liberal connections. There's been allegations that they, in fact, did not meet the requirements going through the process to have this awarded in the first place. Seamus, let's start with you. It's never good when you're a federal cabinet minister and something goes to a family member. It's going to raise red flags. And in this case, is there something fishy?
Well, that's the question. I think that, the government, in question period, they've been taking a bit of a battering on this issue over the past several weeks, and they have been very clear. This is why we have an ethics commissioner, why we have the regime in place to get to the bottom of issues like this. So, it's unfortunate. You never like to see, a minister, embroiled in a question like this, but we hope that the facts will come to light and that we can get to the bottom of it and that there can be some clarity going forward.
Well, and in this case, there's a connection to LeBlanc's wife. There's a connection to a number of Liberals. This is a difficult file for Dominic LeBlanc. When they made him the fisheries minister, Emily, this is someone, that the cod father was literally his father, who has tremendous connections, both business-wise and politically. Should the Liberals maybe have put someone else in the fisheries file to begin with?
Well, I mean, that's their call. But if they're going to put someone in charge of the file who has these kinds of connections to the industry within the family, one would expect that they would be, extremely cautious in terms of preventing against conflicts of interest. So I think the fact that this hasn't been dealt with appropriately is concerning. And when a spokesperson from the minister comes out and says, our government always welcomes an opportunity to work with the ethics commissioner, this is something they're starting to get considerable experience with.
Well, and Jerry, it's one of these things where you can probably see it coming a mile off. It still went ahead. Just because there's a family connection, though, does that mean that there's necessarily something rotten about the deal?
No, not at all. We'll find out if there's something wrong. I think the first thing that jumps out at you about this, however, is that it's a great scandal involving clams. I mean, that's hilarious. I mean, I'm going to love this. The second thing I think about it that's interesting is that it's part of a theme for this government, right? There was conflict of allegations surrounding the finance minister. Justin Trudeau himself got embroiled in an ethics breach because of his trip to the Bahamas. And now you have this. And so I think, if nothing else, until he has his day in court, until we find out what the ethics commissioner actually rules, both the Conservatives and the NDP can kind of bang the war drums and remind people, hey, this is a government that has all kinds of problems. This is just the latest problem that the Liberals have had. So yeah, it's not a good story for the Liberals, no matter how you... I'm trying to think of a clam metaphor. But I can't really. So just say this is not a great story for the Liberals.
Okay, well, speaking of Liberals, Kathleen Wynne here in Ontario, doing a little better than a lot of people expected that she would in the election. Doug Ford trying to come and draw the spotlight. In fact, he just made an announcement a couple of hours ago promising beer in corner stores. For those of you in the rest of the country, that's not something we have here in Ontario. Very popular announcement, potentially heading into the long weekend. But a lot of people, Seamus, going into this really thought it was Doug Ford's to win. He's a controversial candidate, but that the Liberals were so unpopular. And that really is changing. You're seeing that at this point, the election could be anyone's.
Look, Doug Ford has had the worst possible start to a campaign, and free beer, at the corner store is not going to change the channel on the fact that, the 407 information has been stolen and, used for purloined for fake memberships. They've got a police investigation underway on that. He's got a candidate who's been accused of offering a chief of staff job to a nomination rival. Look, Doug Ford, he's got serious issues with his character. He's not premiership material. This long weekend, a lot of Ontarians are going to be looking at the alternatives to him. The NDP and the Liberals, are staking some claims for some common ground, issues like childcare. Well, let's look at that. The NDP plan for childcare won't tell all families how much childcare costs. It is going to create more spaces than there's more demand than there's actually spaces for, and it's focused on rigid ideology, refusing to create for-profit childcare spaces, whereas the Liberal plan is costed, will provide publicly funded childcare to all children over 2.5 years of age, and there's a plan to grow the economy to pay for it that the Liberals have been delivering on. So I think that that's where the discussion is going to shift, given how poorly Doug Ford's campaign has been going.
Well, Emily, certainly the Liberals made a lot of promises. Some of them are very, very expensive promises, and they have a record that has scandals. Now, Ford is dealing with scandals. Is this the NDP's big opening? I think I can't think of a recent provincial NDP scandal.
No, that's right. That's right. And I think, Mr. Ford, when before the campaign, when people talked about it being his campaign to win, to lose, there was a lot of talk about, though, how he was going to run the campaign and what kind of revelations might come out in the course of the campaign. I think it's been pretty clear this week alone that Mr. Ford has some really serious baggage that I think is going to give Ontarians a lot of cause for concern. And so I think, given the circumstances of the real appetite for change, and given those concerns regarding Mr. Ford, I think, yes, that does provide an opportunity for the NDP, not only because it's an opportunity, to divert away from bad or worse to something new, but also because the NDP has a really strong offer on the table.
Jerry, your take on where the election's at right now?
Well, a few people know this, Mercedes, but the official motto of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party is, somehow we'll find a way to lose. And I think that's sort of like a lot of conservatives saying, oh, no, all these stories that, Seamus talked about, oh, no, it's happening again. But I don't think things are going quite as bleak as my friends on the panel have said. I think a lot of these issues which are arising now probably concern the media more than the average voter. I think, beer probably, cancels a lot of those other things out. In fact, I think what has changed, and I would disagree with you, I think the Liberals are in a death spiral right now. I don't think there's any way they can pull out of that. I think what has changed in the election, however, is that the PC momentum has kind of blunted, and the NDP has started to gain momentum. And I think that was inevitable. If you're going into the race as high as the PCs were, they were going to go down, and the NDP, because of the weakness of the Liberals, were going to go up. So that's where we are right now. We'll see what happens in the next few elections. I think a few weeks, I think Ford's main goal now is to figure out, how to start going after the NDP and stopping their momentum.
Okay, well, speaking of momentum, speeches speaking out, Justin Trudeau speaking at New York University yesterday, giving the commencement address. He's taking some criticism, including in the Washington Post, in an editorial that basically said Justin Trudeau loves to talk about listening to others' viewpoints, but in fact, he's running a very ideological government that doesn't listen to other people's viewpoints. You have an environment minister who says she doesn't have time for people who don't believe in climate change. She doesn't want to discuss it. You have the summer jobs program. Does the Prime Minister still have this international image he can play off of, Seamus, or is it getting to the point where people are starting to say, look, it's past mid-mandate and your actions don't line up with these very tolerant words?
The Prime Minister was speaking to an international audience. We see Viktor Orban in Hungary. We see Brexit in the UK. Vladimir Putin using identity politics and Donald Trump using identity politics. The Prime Minister is saying, look, inclusion is something that we should all be proud of, that we should all strive for. For conservative commentators to say, sorry, the fact that I want to exclude certain groups, be they transgender people, be they, anti-abortion activists, they don't understand what inclusion means. That doesn't mean you have the right to exclude others. And so, I think for the Prime Minister to come forward and say, look, this is a value we should fight for, is something we should laud.
Jerry, is this a case of do what I say, not what I do?
Oh, unquestionably, this speech was an orgy of hypocrisy. But that doesn't really matter because this speech was not really directed at the Canadian audience, the domestic audience. This was a speech directed at American left-wing elites. I think what Trudeau is trying to do is brand himself as kind of the progressive, enlightened anti-Trump of the world, which is fine. That's his right to do that. But I think the danger the Liberals might face here is that they're forgetting that it's not American left-wing elites who are going to win him the election in 2019. It's Canadian voters. And Canadian voters care more about the price of gas. They care more about safe streets. They care more about the taxes they're paying than whatever trendy left-wing causes are popular in Hollywood. That's something the Liberals got to keep in mind.
Emily, do you think there's a disconnect here between what's being said and what's being done at home here for voters who are starting increasingly to look at that as we come towards the 2019 election?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that the Prime Minister feels in his element when he's talking about these kinds of issues of diversity and inclusion. I don't quibble with his words. I mean, I agree with a lot of what he said. But I think the problem is the moving from talking the talk to walking the walk. And we saw that this week, for example, with the United Nations Human Rights Commission and their resolution for an independent investigation into events in Gaza, which the Prime Minister himself had called publicly for, and then Canada didn't support the resolution, right? So there's an example of this kind of when it's high-minded and lofty and we're talking about ideals, that's one thing, and it's great. We need that. But at the same time, it's not worth very much if it can't be put into action.
Okay, we have to wrap up our panel there. Thank you very much to our Friday Strats. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.